Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar Orti. If we haven't met before, it's lovely to have you here. And if you're a regular listener, well, you'll know that every now and then we release a bonus episode when either something happens or because we feel like it, let's face it. And in this case, it was because I was recording with Anna Neves, who is the organizer of a conference called Social Now. And I was recording just a little bit of a segment to put in our What's Going On episodes. And in that segment, the idea was that she would tell us about this conference, which has a very interesting structure and a lot of fun, and in which I'm involved. I'm going to be there in Lisbon, 19th and 20th of May. And during the conversation, we just started talking about this whole concept of knowledge management in organizations, why social enterprise networks or enterprise social network platforms are not being adopted, the fact that actually there is very little culture and habits still, and especially in remote teams that became remote during the pandemic, there's still very little habit of working out loud, and what this means to organizations is that a lot of the knowledge is lost. Whereas if we tweak how we use technology, and in particular these social enterprise networks or enterprise social networks, I can never get it right. Come on, Pilar. In particular, if we look at these platforms and we look at them as something that can bring real value to an organization, then we can exploit that opportunity that technology is giving us. So what was supposed to be a 10-minute chat became I think it was even 40 minutes by the end. And I thought this really needs its own episode. And it adds to what Maya and I were talking about in last week's episode about your team's rhythm. And again, this mixture of asynchronous, documentation, etc. So I hope you enjoy it. Now, this is being released on the 31st of March, 2022, which is when the early bird date for the conference tickets expires. But Anna has said, well, it'd be great if you can offer your listeners the opportunity to buy tickets at the reduced early bird price. So listeners, if you use the code, and I'll give you the URL in a second, but if you use the code 21CWL, so 21CWL, you can get the early bird discount until the 8th of April. Otherwise, you can buy the tickets at the normal price. So in today's episode, Anna will talk about what this conference is about, which is essentially about high-performing teams. It's got really interesting structure. And the website of the conference is socialnow.org. So without further ado, here's Anna Neves talking about the conference, but also the need to start thinking about how we manage knowledge in our organization. So listeners, I met Anna Neves recently. She invited me to come to Lisbon to be part of her conference. And when she was explaining what the conference was about and how it operated, I thought, you have to come and tell our listeners, because I think not just the theme is going to be interesting, but also the way in which she is structuring the conference in order to give people a different kind of learning experience. And I think there's definitely something that we can apply into how we curate learning experiences for our teams, for whatever. So, and also the subject is going to be very interesting. So Anna, I'll just give you a very, very brief introduction, listeners. She's a management consultant and the founder of Noman. She is the author and host of KMOL. She's a knowledge management specialist, and she is the organizer of Social Now, which is the conference that is taking place on the 19th and 20th of May, 2022. We are recording now in Lisbon, and it will be the first in-person conference I attend in a very long time. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I look forward to meeting you in Lisbon, I have to say.
Yes. And you are also a listener of the podcast, which I love.
Yes, indeed I am.
I love having listeners on the show because they know what they're getting themselves ourselves into. So that is great. So I'm going to ask if you can give us a quick overview of the conference, and then we'll go into a bit more detail of some of the stuff that's going to happen there and how.
Okay, so Social Now is started in 2012 as a way of making it tangible for organizations to understand how enterprise social tools can actually be part of the way we work rather than something extra that people need to worry about. So, as you were saying, my area of expertise is knowledge management, and these tools can really help with that. But it's important that people realize that using these platforms is not something on top, and it can really help. And Social Now basically lives on the back of a fictitious company that I created, fictitious, but which feels very, very real, with very real challenges. And what happens during the conference is that all presentations are about offering advice to help this fictitious company. And by doing that, you actually get real practical advice for all participants to take home and implement. So,
Excellent.
yeah, that's basically in a nutshell, that's the whole thing about Social Now.
And listeners, Anna and I have just finished recording for Facilitation Stories, which is another podcast, and there she tells the whole story of how this came about, and that'll be episode 42. I think so. Worth checking out as well. So we might feel a bit like we're saying the same thing. So we check in, like, have I said that before? That will be where that come from. Very interesting. So we're talking also these social enterprise social networks, which is, of course, it's the first tool that I came across that I was really excited about, and this was Yammer before
Hmm.
Teams, before Slack, before a lot.
Yes.
And you mentioned in Facilitation Stories that sometimes, and this is how I used to describe it as well to people, was a Facebook for your organization,
Mhm.
which had the negative connotations you were talking about, of course.
Yes, yes, indeed, and I think it's really important that people see and understand the differences, but also the opportunities. And for instance, this whole COVID thing that we're living through at the moment, it's been amazing in terms of getting people to use these platforms a lot more. It's been amazing for knowledge management because all of a sudden lots of our decision making processes are documented in a way,
Mm.
because in chats and team spaces and things like that. But actually, and that's part of a study I conducted recently with Orange Trail, is that actually we have lots of organizations using these tools more, but in a very superficial way. So all these years after Social Now has started, I still feel it's really, really relevant so that people get a good sense of how these tools become part of the way they can work or should be working.
And I'm thinking as you're talking, and I think it's worth just exploring this a little bit more before we go further into the conference itself, is that we can see how teams at a team level, we've started to adopt things like Slack, Teams, other project management tools where we're making more of our work and our conversations visible and our learning. I think the next step will be to take it seriously at the organizational level. So that, again, so that if we have Yammer playing alongside Teams, we know that Yammer is not just for chats and talking about hobbies and stuff, but actually there can be some really good networking throughout the organization happening there, but it needs curating, like you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
It needs someone who's really looking after it.
Yeah, Pilar, but look, even at a team level, when you look at the social collaboration maturity benchmark I was referring to,
Mhm.
and we have the luxury of having done the first edition before COVID, just before,
Yeah,
so we
wonderful.
didn't know what was coming, but it was really convenient because now we can get a before and after. Um, the more teams are using these tools, but they are still at a very early stages in terms of how they're using these platforms. It's just very much for calls, for video conferences, for direct messages, and there's a lot of cultural elements, cultural barriers, if you want, that are still blocking teams to actively and effectively and smartly use these platforms. So we still see that a lot.
I'm glad you brought that up because I've seen that too. I shared in a recent episode and in fact, even like 3 or 4 years ago, I was working with a client who completely understood these tools and was saying they're gonna end up being used as storage places where we just share files, which I've seen recently. So, what is the next step? Do you think then, if people are they're using direct messages, so yeah, one-to-ones mainly, the calls and stuff? What do you think what could we see to think, yes, teams are going on to the next level and making full use or more use of these tools?
I think the concept of working out loud, or as my partners there at Orange Trail say, working in the narrative, is
I
really,
love that.
really important, because what we need to see is teams sharing not necessarily what they've done, like I finished this document, but it is I'm working on this document and making the documents, even the documents. I know it's really hard to take people outside of documents because that's how they've worked for like ages. And we still need documents if you're interacting with clients or whatever. But it's important that people understand, or teams see documents as a work in progress, not something that you just share when it's done because you're afraid of being criticized. It's something that you say you're about to start. It's something that you gather ideas of how to go about it. It's something that you have open for everyone to benefit while you're still in the process of working it. Because if you're working on a report for a month, maybe something that you've written 1 week into writing it can be already of use of someone before the month is over. So this whole idea of I'm part of a team and I'm comfortable making errors, I'm comfortable sharing what I know, I'm comfortable getting feedback from others, that's culture, that's not tools. The amazing things is that tools make it possible now, and I think that's the shift that needs to happen, the click that needs to happen for organizations and for teams to make better use of the available tools.
Myself and other listeners are nodding. We are nodding here.
That's good,
I
and there's
remember.
lots of converts now, but it's actually, let me just share you something very quickly from the report.
Yes.
Before the pandemic, the percentage of people using direct messages was smaller than currently, and I was struck by that. I thought, no, direct messages are now less because there's more people working in teams, in shared team spaces. But then I started thinking, before the pandemic, those using the platforms were the converted, those who believed in these tools. So they were happy to share in open spaces.
Yeah.
And now we have everyone there because they have to be there. Therefore, they don't feel comfortable and they use the direct messages because they don't want to share in open spaces. So, and I was really struck when I saw it, but then I started to think back to my clients and how I see them using, and it made sense.
Yeah, and also the people who had adopted the tools beforehand probably already had a culture and they saw what those tools could enable them to do. Whereas, as you say, this has been forced and the only way. That is so interesting. I remember talking about precisely, going back to the documents thing, precisely that, of having visible work and creating your documents that you were working on, not on your computer, but in the cloud, and having your team being able to access. And I was talking to one of my friends and she had such a negative reaction against it. And it was precisely because she was like, oh, yeah, she's a manager. She was saying, my team would be okay, but I don't want anyone else in the organization to see it till I'm ready.
Yeah.
So this point that you make about culture, not tools, is really, really important.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, okay, so we've got that. And then, so there is that, the adoption at the team level, which we're further behind than I would wish for, of course. Maybe if I say enough times that we're there, maybe we'll get there. And how about at a organizational level? So looking at these tools that are like Facebook for for businesses. So
Yeah.
looking at something like Yammer, how have you seen these being used? If you want to focus on the knowledge management aspect, that's great as well.
Hmm. Well, I've seen organizations trying to compensate for the lack of being together in a physical space,
Mm-hmm.
using these tools to compensate for that and to make up for that. In this idea or in this aim to get employee engagement, or at least to keep employee engagement up. But the thing is, sometimes it looks very purposeless, or
Mm-hmm.
without a purpose, basically. Just
Yeah.
let's create something for the sake of creating it, or let's organize these parties every, like live music every Friday, or let's do a all together thing on Mondays, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that is all good. But if it's not consistent with everything else, that feels shallow and feels fake, and they're wise. People will know that you're just like checking the boxes without really meaning it. And it's just, I think it's even worse than not doing it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
What I also feel is these tools are amazing for employee engagement if they're used to listen to people and what they have to say, not necessarily about their hobbies or whatever, that's important, but these needs to link back to business. Because what brings people together, and like this idea of context, people are there not because they're friends, they're there because they work in the same company. So let's bring them together to talk about the business objectives, the business purpose, the business vision. So create dialogues. That's what these tools are really good for. Create organization-wide dialogues around topics that are important for the business. Maybe it's about getting to new markets. Maybe it's about designing new products. Maybe it's about improving internal processes. Maybe it's about improving employee adoption, employee engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make it part of the business and the values, and integrate and get people to talk with each other and listen to them, because that's the other thing. It's these parties online and stuff, and these moments together are for employees, and very often you don't see managers there. And again, this feels inconsistent, and yeah, a wasted opportunity for me.
Oh, I'm nodding so much, and I hope some listeners are also, because it's exactly my thoughts that, and I think it is going back to how many people feel about the space. It's like saying a space that I've always associated with a party or informality, like a bar, just say a bar, for example, to then switch my mind to have to think about it as a place where we can have conversations about work, around the work, and that can be useful to the organization, will take some kind of mindset shift. If we've always seen a space as a space for X or Y, it's really difficult. But these enterprise social networks were designed, like you said, to create dialogue. And that dialogue can be about everything. And it's still under the umbrella of the organization. So it's okay to encourage dialogue about work in these informal spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, and but when you create dialogue, you need to give evidence that you've actually listened to
Yeah.
what people are saying, because that's the other thing. I see organizations just asking this question: "Oh, we really want to hear from you what you have to say about X," but then nothing. There's no noise, there's nothing back, there's no, yes, we've listened to what you've said, and this is what we are going to do, and this is why we're not doing what you suggested, something. This acknowledgement part is really important, because that's a key element in the dialogue. So again, the tools are there, but sometimes the culture and the practices is lacking. And that's where I think we're still missing an opportunity.
And another point, this is great, where so we're also talking about asynchronous communication a lot of the time with these tools, of course. another thing is, if you're having these dialogues at an organizational level and it's guiding how you're making decisions, you can also say, we've decided to do this because X, Y, and Z. We could have gone down another route. And if for some reason at some point you want to explore that, either, in the organization, in a team, or if you just want to go through a thought experiment, go to this conversation that happened around here and have a look at what was said.
Yes.
Because like you say, it is about knowledge management. It is about keeping the knowledge there. And it's not just for the moment, because that's the whole point of async.
Yes, definitely.
Is that we can refer to it later.
Yes, these platforms, that's why I was saying this is just a golden opportunity for knowledge management, because all of a sudden we're getting people to register what they're thinking, although not as much as we would like, because there's still a lot of synchronous communication. But there's obviously more asynchronous communication, and that is gold in terms of documenting the decision making, the reasons for making a decision or not. And the other thing, which is a very, very simple and sometimes forgotten thing, is sometimes it's as much about knowing what was decided or what was the report which was written as it is about knowing who was part of the conversation. Because if you're lucky enough, you can go back to your colleague 2 years down the line and hear what he or she thought at the time, because that's really invaluable.
Wow. Okay, so that reminds me then that we we were going to record about the conference. So, listeners, this bit might be in, might not. I might split this into 2 episodes. I don't know what's going to happen. However, you're talking about this part of the conversation we had on facilitation stories. You talked about kind of a peer learning exercise. Maybe you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Did you? Was that the term you used, or did you use a specific?
Peer assist. Peer assist.
And there you talked about how we can sometimes, before we start a project, we go and gather information about people who've done it before, and stuff like that. So this is also a great way of doing that when you're about to maybe try something out new, but someone else has done something before. Yeah, you can look for them and talk to them. Fantastic. We're all for synchronous communication as well. But you can also maybe dig out someone who left 6 months ago and they had a really good experience, and they happened to document it in some way.
Yes.
So great.
Yes, that's exactly.
Okay, great. So let's pull back then and go back to the conference social now. And all of this makes sense as well, because the way, okay, I'm going to ask you first what the content, well, we've got this, but then what kind of content there is, and then you can tell us about the focus of it. So, Anna, tell us about what is Social Now about?
So Social Now is really about the use of enterprise social tools inside the organizations and the different ways it can be used, and especially the different ways it can be weaved into the way organizations work. So that's the core thing, or the core topic of all the editions of Social Now. But every edition has a specific focus. And this year, certainly, or especially because of the reasons we were talking about earlier, it's going to be about enabling engaged and high-performing teams. So the stuff we were talking about earlier. And the conference is going to offer advice for the fictitious company on how they can improve the way their teams work to make them more efficient, effective, but also to ensure that the team members are engaged with the vision and the values of the company. So that's going to be the focus of the conference this year.
And I don't know if we've told listeners that how you are approaching this. You've got a blog by a fictitious character.
Yes.
You've created a fictitious company. And just a reminder.
So there's a company called Cabling, which is a company that produces electrical equipment. And the company has a team that have created a fictitious characters. Anne McClear, she's the head of comms. She's the main character, and she actually writes a blog, and she tells the pains, the ups and downs of life at Cabling. And her blog is the way we get to understand the problems they're going through, And that's against those issues, those challenges that the presentations will happen during the conference.
And she's new in this company,
Yes. The
which is
thing,
really interesting.
yeah. So the onboarding thing, and actually one of her first challenges is she gets into the company, and on her first week she hears that the company is opening a new factory in a different country, and she's in charge of the comms plan, both the internal and the external comms plan. And her first action is, I need to learn what was done when they opened the other factories in the past. And there's no one around who's been part of the comms plan at the time. So she struggles with tapping into existing knowledge from day one.
There we go, a proof point. So listeners, if you're like me and listen to podcasts and like to look up stuff as it comes up, the URL for the conference is socialnow.org. So tell us a bit then about the structure of the conference and how this fictitious company is incorporated into it.
Okay, so the conference for this topic of enabling engagement in high performing teams, what I tried to do was to look at the different elements and different ways of making that happen. So I've invited different speakers to cover different aspects. So we're starting with Perry Teams is going to be, I really like his positive and yet very grounded take on work in a hybrid context. So he will be kind of giving us a sense of a new form of work in this hybrid context we're living in. Then we'll have Sylvia Rivella and Marcel Kampman, for instance. They will be talking about the idea of creating space for happiness and creating memorable moments for teams to feel engaged. And yourself, obviously, Pilar, you'll be kind of showing us or giving these fictitious company very practical tips on how people can feel connected. Then we will have some very short sessions on how to improve team meetings. For instance, if you really have to have them, how can they be better?
Yes.
Or how you can make the content to posts in your internal platforms be more impactful and get more engagement for employees. So the other thing is, for instance, in the morning of the first day, we're going to have a hands-on session, and we'll be using Liberating Structure and inviting all participants to share their experiences, maybe negative, maybe positive, stuff that they've tried. And we're going to tap into their existing knowledge and experience to identify good practices to boost teams' performance and engagement. So it's kind of an icebreaker because they will be working together, but it's contextual to the fictitious company, because what they're going to do is to tap into their experience to draw some practical advice for the fictitious company.
And what we were talking about when we were recording for the other podcast for Facilitation Stories is that the fact that we are going to be focusing on this fictitious company means that we don't turn around to our neighbor and advise them.
Yes.
But actually we've got a great focus where actually we can share. The stakes are very well, there's no stakes.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if we give them crap advice.
No, it's really interesting because the characters in the fictitious company, they're very memorable. Their names are very memorable. So you've got John McChief, he's the CEO. You've got Louise McGeek, she's the CIO. You've got McCash from finance. You've got McMahon from HR. You've got McCable, is the head of engineering. Yeah. So these names are really memorable, which means that even participants who've never attended in the past, after one or two presentations, they will know these names by heart. And at least if they hear them, they know what the person does. Yes. And they start asking questions. There's lots of time for debate and Q&A and all these hands-on and practical sessions. So they refer to the characters by name, and sometimes they imagine that I'm McCable. So they kind of ask questions on behalf of the fictitious company, which is, and they make up different characters. We had one year, it was an hilarious participation from comment from one of the participants, and he said, "Imagine that I'm McFired." And I'm taking all my knowledge with me because I'm annoyed with the company.
Yes,
So
McFire.
it's just it introduces a touch of humor and makes it tangible. Everyone will know someone like McMahon, or someone has been McClear at some point in their life. So it just makes it very relatable and very tangible.
Yeah, and sometimes even I just think of how I would bring this back to my team is also the next time we are trying to figure out how to get our way out of something, or that we basically troubleshooting, we might have that. We might say, okay, if we were advising another team, what would we say?
Hmm.
And so it's also a technique that we can take back. Just a little aside, you mentioned liberating structures, which I'm just going to tell listeners, if they haven't heard of it, Google it. It's lots of different ways of structuring meetings so that they have a different feel to what we're used to. And so actually,
Yes.
they're incredibly participative. It's about creating structures where everyone's voice can be heard and where everyone is involved in creating, planning, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so what else do we need to tell listeners about this? So,
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things that I've not mentioned about
mhm,
the conference that are
yes,
also important.
the content as well.
So, in terms of the advice that the fictitious company, obviously not participants because they don't need any of that, but the fictitious company is getting advice from the consultants, but they're also getting live demos from vendors. So we're going to have we have 5 confirmed tools. We may have another one, but just no more than 6 actually. So we're going to have Mango Apps and Craft boards and Microsoft 365 and Guru Scan and Swoop Analytics. So very, very different platforms. But what we're going to see is a live demo. They actually cannot even show slides, and they need to do a live demo for cabling as if they were telling us a day in the life of cabling, the fictitious company, using that tool. And this is to address the challenge of allowing participants to get a sense of the impact these tools can have in our day-to-day work. Because as we were mentioning before, the technology is there and allows us to do pretty much everything we want,
Mm,
but we just don't know how to use it, how to push it to enable different ways of working. So that's what we get from the live demos.
mm,
And if you're like people worried about, oh, now I don't want to see vendors presenting, they're just going to sales pitch mode. As I've mentioned to you before,
mm.
participants have flags on their tables and they can raise them if they feel that the vendors are selling to them. So
Brilliant.
2 flags and you're out,
Yeah, yeah.
basically.
That's great.
um,
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, the other thing is the peer assist
Yeah. One
that we
one one
talked.
second, Anna, because I did
Yeah,
want to I did want to mention about the fact that you've got this context, that we're bringing the tech into the context of the team. We already know what the challenges are of the team. We know the characters as well, or we can,
yeah,
whatever, we're making them up. However, this means that when we come to look at the tech, we know why we're implementing it. We know that it needs to adapt to the team, and we know
yeah.
why we're bringing in. And like you say, the technology, even one application has so many things we can do, but it's not about that. It's about what can it help us with. So I think
Yeah.
that's really
Yeah, and
interesting.
actually, the vendors receive they have access to the blog of the fictitious company, but I kind of digest all that for them. I highlight the key challenges. So the blog, if you go through the blog, which is freely available online, you'll see that there's kind of four main threads. One is our challenges, if you want. One is the access and retention of critical knowledge. You've got employee engagement. Another one is internal communication, and finally teamwork and collaboration. So these are the four main threads. And through the blog posts, the fictitious company character and McClear, she will tell you about the comms plan for the new factory, or her own onboarding, the challenges of her onboarding, or the too many meetings and too many emails, and Zoom fatigue and balancing work life while working from home. So these are the challenges that will be anchoring the presentations. And I actually work with the vendors before the conference to make sure that their demos are tied in to the fictitious company, and I help them sometimes choose and identify which are the business challenges that are more fit or suitable to showcase their tool, for instance. So as you were saying, it's not just showing the features of a tool, it's about showing how the tool allows the company to address these very, very specific challenges.
Mhm. And is the blog accessible through socialnow.org?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
it is.
Right.
So, but it's House of Cables, which is the name of the blog, houseofcables.socialnow.org.
Okay. Okay. Great. Good. So, just finally, to give us that final bit of information around what's happened and the kind of learning that you've curated for attendees, you were talking about the peer assist, which we've
Yes.
already mentioned a little bit.
Yeah. So the peer assist is a knowledge management technique. Is something that organizations can and should do to at the beginning of a project, or maybe at the beginning of a very important stage within a project. And it's the very basic idea is that you benefit from the learning of others who maybe in other parts of the company or even in other companies have done similar projects. And just as a tip, when I say similar, it can be very flexible. And I always use this example. If you're making a new bridge somewhere, maybe you want to invite a farmer, because farmers dig holes all the time to plant trees. So you can be flexible and invite people who may not be very obvious choices, because that will allow us and give you space for the innovation spark to come. So that's just a tip.
Yes. Yes.
The concept for the peer assist is basically the person or the team starting a project invites these peers and says, this is what we are about to start, and we want your feedback or input rather. How should we go about doing this, and what are the things that we need to avoid and be careful of? And basically they shut up from there, and they just listen to the peers. And I've brought this format as a session for Social Now. And for this year, Anne McClear, so the fictitious character, she wants to start a program within Cabelink to get more teams to use the existing platforms in a more efficient and smarter way to really change the way they work. So she wants to drive adoption of these tools by teams. So she invites peers. They are real people from real organizations, and they will be giving advice on how to go about it. And I think the beauty of this, and that's exactly the feedback we got last year when I first tried this format, is that when these peers give advice, they're not lecturing anyone. They are just saying what they would do. And that comes from either trying it and it going well, or trying it and it going really badly. So this is what you should not do. But we don't need to know which one, if it was a success or a failure in their case, or maybe they've heard someone tell them about it, or maybe they've tried it in a different company. So this means that all the obstacles we usually have when we put someone on stage to share like their use case, the case in their organization, they're okay. Nobody needs to know point the finger at the organization because we don't know where the advice comes from.
Yes, yes.
So it becomes really, really open and very true, very honest. And that's what both participants said. They felt very liberated and free to give their advice last time. And participants really enjoy the kind of open feedback they got. And the other thing is to really round things up, because I think it's very easy for us to go to a conference and then we get back to our desks the following day and we kind of forget everything. After the peer assess, so after we hear from the peers, participants in their tables draw together a list of the to-dos and not to-dos if they're about to start a similar project in a program in their organizations. And that's shared for all the participants to take away with them.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to come back, listeners, and I'm going to be full of inspiration. And the thing with this kind of thing as well is that there is so much opportunity to speak as a participant.
Yes.
That for me, that always makes me think. That's why I have the podcast also, because it helps me really to ruminate and assimilate and structure my thoughts as I'm communicating them. So I love that as well.
Yeah. Pilar, and the other thing is the speakers that I invite to come, and I've been really, really humbled and happy and honored by the people who accept my invitation to present. I choose them not just because of all the wealth of knowledge and experience they have, practical experience, but also for their willingness to learn from others. So it's unlike other conferences where people present and then they leave the room and nobody can benefit from their experiences anymore. Participants do stay, and actually speakers do stay. And actually what have been, again, very humbled to have is people who I invite as speakers then come back as participants afterwards. And it's just, I usually say that I'm really proud for all the people I have on stage, but equally as proud for the people I have participant, because you have like reference names attending the conference and making sure that the debate and the learning is as rich as possible. So it's just a really good experience. It's like a celebration.
Sounds like that.
That
sounds like that. Yes. And something that I'm thinking, and we're going to wrap up, listeners, is that you give both participants and presenters common information right from the beginning. Mm-hmm. You've created this fictitious company with the characters. The blog is out there. I think there's a great learning for whoever wants to have an engaging event across the organization where everyone feels involved. Give them something that they all have, because very often we go to an event where we come as participants and the presenters or the people leading the meeting or whatever have lots of information, but we don't have it. And so just having that common point of context, etc., I think it starts to unite everyone together from the beginning as well. And then plus, of course, all the rules you put around presenters, which are great. So yeah, congratulations. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you.
Listeners, socialnow.org, if you want to join us, I would love to meet some more listeners in person. That would be really lovely. 19th and 20th of May, 2022 in Lisbon. So Anna, let's just wrap up by saying Anna Neves, which is the surname is Neves. You can find you on LinkedIn and anywhere else that listeners can say hello.
Twitter, probably that's where I am mostly. LinkedIn and Twitter, that's the best place to find me.
Excellent. We'll put the link to your handles. Actually, if you can just tell us your handles now, quickly.
Yeah, it's Anna Neves, both in ANANEVES, both on Twitter and on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And if you speak Portuguese, Anna has a podcast, KMOL, is that right?
Yes.
Excellent.
So, which stands for Knowledge Management and Organizational Learning. It's very creative.
Well, at least people know what you attract the right crowd, definitely. So yes, if you speak Portuguese, you can have a listen to that, seeing as your podcast listener. So Anna, thank you very much for your conversation.
Thank you very much for having me, Pilar. And as I said, I really look forward to meeting you in the flesh.
Yay! Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed that. And once again, if you want to join us at the conference, you can use the code 21CWL, so the number 21CWL, to access the early bird fee until the 8th of April. And the URL again for the conference is socialnow.org. Thank you very much for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.